Welcome to Fridays for Future live post, flipping the narrative on the climate crisis. I'm Alicia, and during the series, we're talking about solutions that we have and how they might look practically in our everyday life in Aotearoa, New Zealand, breaking down the big picture through looking at different perspectives and how it all ties together. Today, we're talking with Jenny from Love Food Hate Waste. Jenny's going to help explain how Love Food Hate Waste came about and how food waste contributes to carbon and methane emissions and what could be done at government and community level to reduce waste. So thank you so much, Jenny, for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about Love Food Hate Waste?
Sure. Well, thanks so much for having me, Alicia. So, Love Food Hate Waste is really a campaign to try and raise awareness of the issue of food waste, the role it plays in climate change, and also to give people kind of skills and tips on how they can personally take action to reduce their own food waste. Because I think there's lots of waste issues that are popular at the moment in the media. We hear a lot about plastic and packaging and recycling, but sometimes people forget about food waste. And plastic and packaging, they're really big issues. They have a huge impact on our oceans. But when we think about climate change and the long-term future of our planet, food is an area that we really all need to be focusing on.
Yeah, I've got your website up there. I delved a bit deeper into that last night, and you've got incredible resources on there, and some really concerning statistics. And I also looked at, what did I look at? Yeah, the food waste iceberg, and you had the economic costs at the top. But underneath was all the climate, the cost to the environment. Did you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. So I think so there's a few issues when we kind of think about food waste. So the first thing is often people think about, all the issues when it goes to landfill, because obviously when food waste goes to landfill, it rots, it doesn't compost or break down nicely, and it releases methane, which is one of those really short-lived greenhouse gases. So in the short term, it's having a huge impact on our planet. But when we think about the emissions caused by food waste, the whole process of producing the food in the first place. So I'm sure many of your listeners, are probably aware that, with industrial agriculture, we use oil to make fertilizers, to put chemical fertilizers into the soil. So if we don't eat our food, if that food gets wasted, then all those emissions created from growing the food, there's the transportation and distribution of the food. Quite often to preserve the life of food, we need to keep it in chilled storage. So there's all those expenses from that perspective. And I think also if we think about, our growing population, the world's population by 2050 is going to head close towards 9 billion people. We actually don't have enough arable land to grow all of our food. So another issue, not so much in New Zealand, although a bit more so in Canterbury, is water. We need a huge amount of water to grow crops. So when we're wasting food, we're wasting it. And there are parts of the world where that's a real issue. So I think it's kind of, people often only see, it doesn't really matter if I waste my little bit of food, but it's all those other steps in the process where food can be wasted and the emissions that come from that, which make it such a big problem. And I think we mentioned just earlier that, if food waste for a country, it would be the third largest contributor to climate change after America and China. So that's huge in terms of the amount of emissions that are being wasted.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really huge, because I think one of the questions I did have for you was, the environmental effects, like deforestation, water usage, oil.
And just to think about numbers, if we think about households, so just people like you and I, so not thinking about what's wasted on farm or businesses and industry, we waste 157,000 tonnes of food every year in New Zealand, which is food that we could have eaten and that we threw away. So I mean that, I can't even begin to imagine how big 157,000 tonnes looks like. And it's $1.19 billion worth of food that households buy and they don't end up eating. So that's just the kind of household impact. Then if we add in the amount of food wasted by supermarkets, by restaurants and cafes, by grow food, we're talking really large amounts of money of food that we don't want to be wasting. I'm sure no one here wants to waste food, but we just end up wasting.
That's phenomenal. It's actually not just phenomenal, but really scary.
Well,
considering, I think, because there's a fantastic quote on your website that says, while hunger is a problem that is hard to fix, we owe it to those who are starving to respect the food that we have access to. What are your thoughts on that?
that's right. Well, because it's one of those weird things that we have at the moment. And I think we see this in a number of issues, not just around food waste. So we have an obesity epidemic in some parts of the world. In other parts of the world, we've got people going hungry. We've got food that's being wasted here because we buy too much. And we can't get it to us in time, and so we end up throwing it away. Whereas often in third world or developing countries, food is being wasted there because they grow their crops and they might not have good storage. So, insects and things get in there, and, or they might have a year where the crop fails, so they can't, pull those crops out. So the reasons why we're wasting food in the developing world compared to the developed world are quite different. And so for us, it's kind of this luxury. Well, we can afford to waste food, doesn't really matter. Whereas in the third world, they're doing everything that they possibly can to make sure that the food they grow isn't wasted, but sometimes they just don't have the infrastructure. They can't. In Kenya, for example, where they grow mangoes, sometimes in mango season, they rot on the ground because the roads are really bad and they just can't get the fruit to market in time. So sometimes for them, it's like an infrastructure issue. Whereas for us here, it's not so much an infrastructure, it's just we don't value our food enough. And we think, we had someone commenting on our Facebook post last night, my kids don't like eating the potato peels, but it doesn't matter because I chuck them on the garden and they're good for the garden. And yep, that's completely great that she's not sending them to landfill, but that's still food that was grown that they could have eaten. And so now they need to go out and buy more food because they weren't eating that part of the food. And then that's kind of when we kind of have to grow more and more food because we're a bit fussy about what we're going to eat and what we're not going to eat.
Okay. So the takeaway from that is in developing countries, the most of the wastage comes from production and transport issues. Right. And in developed countries, it's more on the consumer end. Most food waste comes from us and cafes and supermarkets and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's a really fair comment. And I suppose that's because, we want to have that luxury of choice. We go into a supermarket and we want to see the shelves filled with different kinds of breads to buy. And if they only offered us one bread, we'd feel a little bit shortchanged. But when a supermarket has to provide, 5 or 6 different kinds of bread rolls so that everyone's happy, then inevitably that's going to lead to greater wastage. Equally, if we go into a restaurant or a cafe, some people feel like, well, we have to give people a really large serving size because if it's too small, people will feel unhappy with it. And so then we don't finish everything that's on our plate. We go into a restaurant and we expect to have 30 different dishes on offer. But on one particular day, no one buys one dish, so all the ingredients that have gone for that dish, they end up going to waste. So too many choices.
Yeah. So food waste actually does have a rather large carbon footprint. So from is it farmer to fork? I think that was one of the phrases on your website is, the carbon footprint from farmer to fork. And then, of course, when we throw out what we don't want at the end as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's always really hard when you kind of think about tons of CO2 and how can you connect it. So if you think about the amount of food that just households throw away every year, if we were trying to compensate with that or mitigate that, we'd have to take 150,000 cars off the road for a year, and then we would be balancing out how much emissions we've created. Or we'd have to plant 163,000 trees every year to offset the amount of food that households are wasting. So if you kind of think about the amount of effort involved in planting 163,000 trees, that's a huge amount of effort to offset the food that we're just kind of going, I can't be bothered to eat that, or I don't feel like eating that, and throwing it away.
Wow. Yeah, it's actually really good to be able to compare that with, so the food wastage, taking the cars off the road, planting the trees, it's actually a really good helpful visual to have. In what ways do you think government policies could help reduce food waste?
Sure, and I think
I'm actually just going to have to pop away for a second.
Sure, I think there's children happening.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Sorry.
I'm going to keep talking to everyone who's still listening in. So look, there's lots of things that we can all be doing to reduce food waste. I think in terms of the government policy space, there's some practical things that can be done. So one thing is this whole idea of a use by and a best before date. Do we need to put a best? So if something reaches its best before date, it can't be sold. It's perfectly fine to eat. There's nothing wrong with it. But supermarkets and shops have to take it off the shelves, and those dates can be quite arbitrarily set. Because no one knows exactly when the best before date should kick in. So there's probably some products out there where maybe they don't even need a best before date on them, because actually they're going to last for such a long time. There shouldn't be a cutoff time where it's like, well, you can no longer sell this. So I think that's an area, for example, where government policy can make a difference. We know that food rescue groups do a fantastic job. And I'm looking earlier in the week, back in 2015, when we first started kind of campaigning around food waste and trying to raise awareness of the issue, we had 7 towns in New Zealand that had access to fresh food rescue. So that's when you're rescuing food that has a short shelf life, like fruit and vegetables. So you need someone who's got a refrigerated van who can go to the supermarkets, get that food really quickly and drop it really quickly to the food banks. And now we've got up to 15 towns around New Zealand who've got groups and volunteers. But they get no government funding. They're having to fundraise all the time to get those refrigerated vans, to pay the drivers to do that. So wouldn't it be great to see if we could see a bit more support for that? Because that's one of the things about food waste. It sounds doom and gloom, like we waste so much food, but it's actually a really easily solvable problem. Some of our other environmental challenges, how we're going to reduce our emissions, are really tricky. And no one even knows how we're going to kind of stop cows from farting and kind of reduce some of those methane emissions. But food, it's a really easy one. If we can get the food where it's not wanted to people who need it, problem solved. If we can work with families and households to give them ideas for using up leftovers or better understanding of the difference between the use by date and the best before date, problem solved. That's why I always think the great thing about food waste is that it is a solvable problem and we know what the solutions are, whereas for some of our other climate change contributors, it's a little bit harder to know how are we going to solve this problem. And just talking from my own experience, when I first started on this, like I'm not the world's best chef or the best cook. My mum didn't teach me how to cook, so I've had to learn very painstakingly how to cook over the years. But I didn't realise that you could eat a broccoli stalk. My mum never cooked with broccoli stalks, so I just assumed that you were forced to cut off the end of the broccoli stalk. And then someone said, oh, no, you can eat those. And then I was like, oh, yeah, they taste really nice. So, that's a small change that I've made. So now I eat broccoli stalks all the time. I used to go to the supermarket and do my weekly shop, and I'd buy all my meat and I'd put it into the fridge. And then, life would be busy and stuff would happen, and I'd pull the meat out and it would have all gone off. But it never occurred to me that when I buy my meat, I'd put it straight away now into the freezer. And then, the night before or the morning before, I pull it out and I'm good to go. Such a simple change, but I now no longer waste, this huge amount of food because I suddenly go, oh, I got busy. Suddenly it's at the back of the fridge. And I'm like, how could I not have thought to do that? But, we're busy, we're time poor. Like me, someone might not have taught you how to cook. And there's just some simple things that people can do where you can make a big difference.
Some really great tips. Yeah, it was actually, I think my father-in-law talked about the broccoli stalk, and so we do that now. They're quite nice, actually, raw. Yeah, so some other, around the world, what are some other countries doing that perhaps we could adopt? I think there's something that I read in France. It's illegal to throw away edible food from the supermarket.
Yeah, so France passed a law kind of 3 or 4 years ago now, basically banning supermarkets from just, putting food to landfill. It's a really interesting one. It's a really good concept, but something like that needs a long lead-in time. At the moment, our food rescue groups don't actually have the capacity to rescue all the food that there is in New Zealand. So I'm here in Auckland. We've got 2 really great food rescue groups in Auckland, Kiwi Harvest and Fair Food. But they don't have enough staff or capacity to rescue food from all the supermarkets in Auckland, just because they don't have enough funding. So legislation like that can be a good thing, but it needs a reasonable amount of lead-in time, and you need to have some thought around if all food waste is banned from landfill, how do we provide ongoing funding to those groups to pick it up and then redistribute it? Because it's really easy to say, right, we're going to ban it from landfill, and then the supermarkets are like, great, well, who are we going to give it to? And there might be no one there. But that's not to say that, if you have a 5 or 6 year lead in time, if you let people know this change is coming. We also need to think about, as I said, how do you fund food rescue groups, or how do you make that more desirable? So in America, for example, they have legislation where you get a tax credit if you donate food. So there's an incentive to businesses to donate food because they'll get a tax credit back. And that's great. But what if all that tax credit money, or that money could be actually given to food rescue groups? How can we get people valuing food rescue as an alternative service? So when people create rubbish, they pay a rubbish company to take that rubbish away for them. But when people donate money to a food rescue group, they kind of feel like, oh, well, I'm doing you a favour by letting you take my food away. But could they not be seen as an alternative way? And this is where I really like to commend Countdown. So Countdown is really conscious of this issue, and they've got a real commitment to kind of reducing food waste. So they now have a fund of $100,000 that food rescue groups can apply to get funding. And so they funded vehicles, they might fund a person's salary for a year. So they've really kind of acknowledged that food rescue is helping them with their rubbish problem or their food problem. And so they're now kind of funding those groups with capacity and scale. So, we need to kind of think about that in the long term. How do we make sure that these food rescue groups are kind of viable? Because the key thing is that if you take that food and you rescue it, you're not allowed to resell it. So therefore, the more food they rescue, the more expenses they have. So normally in a business, the more you do, the more money you make, the more profit you make. So for food rescue groups, it's the opposite. The more food you rescue, the more funding you need, because you now need more staff or more vehicles. And so how do we what's the financial model for them that doesn't involve endlessly kind of putting their hands out saying, please, donate some money?
I imagine that there would be a big call out for volunteers. I think we have Kibosh in Wellington, and I quite often see on the Do Good Jobs email newsletter I get, they're quite often looking for drivers to go around and collect the food, etc., from cafes and supermarkets.
Yeah, you need people to sort the food. So just because people think that the food is suitable for donation doesn't necessarily mean that it is. So in my own kind of personal capacity, I think it's, I do this obviously as part of my job, but I'm also personally engaged in the topic. So for about a year, I went down to my local supermarket, and they would put aside 2 boxes of fruit and vegetables, which were, in their opinion, unfit to be sold, but could still be eaten. But I'd always have to take them back to my house, and I'd carefully sort through. And sometimes the food was like, oh, actually, no, you can't use this. A good example is avocados. It's not until you cut through the avocado that you've really got a good sense of whether it can be used or not. So, food rescue groups always need people to sort through the donations to make sure that they're suitable, to divide them up. If anyone here is in Auckland at the moment, we've got a really funny situation. We've got a local store, and they've got 8 boxes of frozen sweet pumpkin phyllo pastries. But they're all frozen. They're big boxes. There's 35 in there. And we've got to find someone who can fit, 5 boxes of frozen things into their freezer. Well, there's not that many food banks around us where we are in Auckland that could take 5 boxes. And when we've approached various people, they're like, oh, well, I need to try one first to make sure we like them. So, food rescue kind of has these really interesting challenges when you're like, okay, I've got these sweet pumpkin phyllo pastries, and everyone's like, oh, I don't know what they'll taste like. Will we like them? So, yeah, so I think, if people want to make a personal difference to food waste, getting involved in your local food rescue, whether it's by doing a fundraiser, and anyone who's listening and who's in Wellington, they've got a really fun fundraiser coming up for Kibosh next year. So they've got a race called Round the Bays Race, and they're going to try and break the Guinness Book of Records for people dressed up as fruit and vegetables to run the race. So if you're a runner and you feel like dressing up in a banana costume or a tomato costume, apparently the world record is 845 people. So if that's, it's
wow.
a fun way to kind of raise awareness of food waste and the issues and things like that. So yeah, if you're a runner and you want to head down to Wellington dressed as a banana, there's an opportunity for you to get involved that way.
I am a runner. Yeah, and I'm in Wellington.
Oh, and
so yeah, I might have to run the talk on that one. Fantastic. So how can people find out about where to find a local food waste group? Is there a directory somewhere?
Yep, sure.
Do they just Google it?
We've got a directory on our website. So, but if you go onto the Love Food Hate Waste Facebook page at the moment, we just did a post about that earlier in the week. So if you go on and look there, and we've got a list of what we call fresh food rescue groups. I think that's one way to get involved. But something else that we've seen in the kind of the last 2 years, which is a really simple way for everyone to get involved, is setting up they're called either a community fruit and veggie stand or a pataka kai stand. The pataka kai is more commonly used in Auckland, community fruit and veggie stand around the country. And this is where people have gone, hey, I've got surplus fruit in my garden, surplus veggies in my vegetable garden, food that I can't use. And what they've done is they've made little stands outside their houses or outside a school or outside a community centre where they kind of put free food, help yourself. So we had a lady who set one up in Tall Bay, which is where I live. It's on the grounds of a church, which is kind of close to the road. And people who've got excess lemons or excess feijoas, which are kind of big fruit that goes to waste here in Auckland, can go and kind of put that fruit in there, and anyone can come along and help themselves. And what's really nice about that is that people can donate at any time of the day. So if you've ever wanted to kind of go and donate food to a food bank, they've often got really limited opening hours. And I find when I work, they normally open from 9 till 3, and I work from 8 till 4, and it's like I can never get there to kind of drop some food off. So these stands are open 24 hours a day usually. You can pop some food in, and then anyone can walk past and go, oh, actually, I need a lemon, I'll take a lemon, or I need some parsley, I can take some parsley. And we've also seen that in the stand that I'm involved with in Tall Bay. They've gone around and spoken to the local cafes, and so the cafes will come down at the end of the day and put in any unsold food that they have. We've got a few people who go to the local supermarket, and they've been able to get permission to kind of put some fruit and vegetables in those stands. And we've now got something like 130 of those community fruit and veggie stands around the country, about 60 or 70, I think, pataka kai stands that work on a similar basis. So that's been a great way for just individuals to get involved, because, if you've got surplus, you can go and drop it off. If you don't have surplus, you don't need to drop it off, so there's not a huge time commitment. I'm a gardener. I'm not a great gardener, but at this time of the year, I've got far too much parsley and rosemary and mint. So I take all my herbs and put a little rubber band around them, and I drop them off in a jar of water. Then someone else will come past and go, oh, I don't have any of those. So that's just a really simple exchange that people can make. I had a next door neighbour who I hadn't met before, and she left a bag of grapefruit on my doorstep. And she said, oh, I'm your neighbour at number 72, and I had more grapefruit than I needed. So I kind of went over and said hello to her, and we've now developed a friendship through doing that. So I think, it's really some really fun and simple ways that we can start sharing our food, building community, and tackling this waste issue at the same time.
That's fantastic. That's a really, really cool project. I quite like that. What about people that have lots of fruit trees? Quite often you'll drive around and you'll see people with lots of mandarin trees in their gardens, or the feijoas and that. Is there some kind of project around harvesting the extra fruit or extra produce that people have?
Yeah, sure. So in some parts of the country, there are groups called community fruit harvesting. And what they do very bravely, in my opinion, is they go and knock on people's doors and say, hey, I can see you've got lots of lemons on your tree. Are you using them all up, or do you think you could donate some to the local food bank? And what they will do is they'll come and actually pick the tree for you if you want to. You can say, well, actually, leave me 20 lemons, and they'll pick the rest. Or, leave the ones on the bottom, and can you take the ones on the top? And then those are dropped off to local food banks. So I've done that myself in my local area, and it's a really great way. Particularly, it's a grapefruit. Lots of people might have a grapefruit tree, but if you're on blood thinning medication, you shouldn't be eating grapefruit. So we get lots of older people ring us up saying, look, I've got all these grapefruit that I'm not allowed to eat. Come and pick them and share them around. And then as part of community fruit harvesting, in some areas, they've got jam makers. So they'll take all this beautiful fruit and they'll turn it into jam, and then the jam can get donated at food banks, because obviously it's got a much longer life as a jam than as a fresh piece of fruit. So, Auckland and feijoa season, you have more feijoas than you could possibly eat if you've got a feijoa tree. So I've also seen people hang bags of feijoas off their front fence in front of their house, with like a
fantastic.
And that's such a small thing to do. But if you don't have a food dietary, you're desperate for food diets because they're often like $9 a kilo. And so for someone to kind of say, hey, here's some extra from mine, it's just a fabulous treat.
That's awesome. So what I'm really hearing is that it's people sharing the extra that they have with other people in their community or other communities, or and another way of addressing the food waste is being a little bit more mindful about what you're buying from the supermarket.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a few simple things that will help kind of anyone who's listening in to reduce their own food waste, or that it's good, I suppose, to kind of pass on. Because I think one of the things is that my mother never taught me how to cook. And so, I kind of had to painfully acquire any of my cooking skills. And so, for anyone who's listening in who's kind of, got children or grandchildren, it's really important to pass on some of these skills because we kind of have in the moment a little bit of a microwave generation where it's like cooking is putting something in the microwave and that's all you know how to do with it. And I have a really good friend of mine who was in her 30s, and she posted one day with great excitement on Facebook that she'd finally made a smoothie for the first time. And I was quite horrified that you could get to the age of 36 and not know that you could put some milk and put some fruit into a blender and make a smoothie. And so I think it's some of those really basic fundamental cooking skills or shopping skills that we kind of need to pass on. So top tips from me are make a shopping list and take it with you. If, like me, you're a bit hopeless and you make the shopping list and you forget to take it with you, which I do all the time, write your shopping list and then take a photo with it on your phone. And then when you get into the supermarket and you're like, oh, I forgot my shopping list, you're like, oh, yeah, I took a photo with it on my phone. Another really even simpler way to do it is to open your fridge and take a photo of your fridge before you go shopping. And then when you're like, now, do I still have some of that in my fridge or not? You've got the photo on your phone, so you can quickly have a look at it and kind of go, oh, actually, I've got that. I don't need to buy it. Another really useful way to reduce your food waste is if you're into meal planning. And this doesn't suit everyone's personality, but if you can kind of go, right, what have I got in my fridge? What have I got in my pantry? What meals am I going to make this week? And therefore, what am I missing that I need to buy? And then only buying that will really help you from avoiding those purchases where you're like, oh, it's on special, 2 broccoli for $3. And then at the end of the week, one of those broccoli has faded into the rubbish bin because you just really didn't have a concept of what you were going to do with that second broccoli. And it's not a bargain if it ends up in your compost bin or in your rubbish bin. Another really good thing to think about as well is food storage. Because we buy, if you're like me, and you like a good special or a good bargain, you might see a big bag of carrots. And you think, oh, great, I'll buy that big bag of carrots. And by the time you've got to the end of your bag of carrots, you're like, oh, they've kind of gone slimy and horrible. So some simple things that make it a huge difference. And I should almost probably disappear off screen and go and show you some of the things from my fridge, but I won't do that. Otherwise, you'll be looking at a void for a few minutes. So I love celery. And when you buy celery, if you chuck it straight into the fridge, it kind of goes limp straight away. And then a few people go, oh, well, let's store it in a jar of water or something, and then all the bottom gets slimy and horrible. The best thing you can do to keep your celery crisp, wrap it in a paper towel, and then chuck it in like one of those big Ziploc plastic bags, which you just wash and use over and over again. I think my bag's about 5 years old now. And it will keep that celery as crisp as the moment you bought it, without it going slimy on the bottom. So you can kind of eat up all of that celery. Carrots is another one where you have these carrots and they look really good and then they start to kind of go all black and horrible on the outside and you're like, oh, how's that happened? If you put carrots into any kind of airtight container, so it can be a plastic container or it can be a big glass jar if you're going plastic free, put a paper towel in it, those carrots will last up to 9 times longer. So that big bag of carrots you buy, will last you 2 or 3 weeks. So I think when we buy food, we're like, oh, thank goodness I've come back from the shopping, and we just, chuck everything into the fridge as quickly as possible. Whereas if we take a little bit of time to kind of store things correctly, then we might get an extra week or 2 or 3 days. Another classic example at this time of the year is your bagged salads. We all love those bagged salads, and then we take half of it out, and then we kind of tie it in the top or do something to it, and then we kind of go, oh, and it's all horrible. Once again, take that salad and either put it into a lettuce crisper or just put it into any kind of airtight container, and you'll get another 2 or 3 days out of it, and it'll be just really crisp and fresh the whole time. So the worst thing you can do is to leave it in that bag where it kind of goes all slimy and horrible, and that's no good. So on our website, we've got lots of simple tips around, how to store things correctly, what to make out of leftovers, how to use up those broccoli stalks, and bread crust. If your children don't like to eat bread crust, there's lots of great things that you could turn them into.
Fantastic. Yeah, wow, that's a lot of tips that I need to that I haven't been doing. So that's good, because it really, especially the carrot one, it we waste a lot of carrots. I did have a question from one of our members. She wanted to know how much of this problem is due to consumers and how much is food supply system, like discarding imperfect fruit or past use by date food.
Sure, that's a really interesting question, and it's fair to say that we can't answer that question fully at the moment. So we've done research into how much food households waste, how much food is wasted by the cafe and hospitality and restaurant sector, how much food supermarkets waste, but kind of no research has been done to date around kind of what we call commercial food waste, which is what happens at the factory and production side, or what happens at the farm gate. It's fair to say that in New Zealand the situation is not as bad as in Europe. So in Europe, ironically, they have a rule which says how curvy a banana should be. And if your banana is not that curvy, then you can sell it into the European market. But their rules around kind of those things are much more high spec than in New Zealand. So that's a really good thing. The other thing that's a bit different in New Zealand as well, more so in the North Island than in the South Island. So we have our main supermarkets where we go to do our food and grocery shopping. But we have a lot of smaller fruit and vegetable shops that are independently owned. And so those smaller fruit and vegetable shops need a competitive advantage with the big supermarkets to survive. And so they will often buy what we call tag 2 or tag 3 produce. So tag 1 is kind of your premium export grade, not a flaw in it, absolutely perfect. And then tag 2 and tag 3 is stuff that's not first grade. Now, grade is often determined by size. So you'll often see some of these shops selling really, really small apples. Perfect for children's lunch boxes, but they're not the standard apple size. Or you might see them selling really, really large apples. Perfect if you're making a pie or a dessert out of apple, but kind of too big. So that's the really good news is that we do have these alternative outlets who will buy fruit that's of a slightly lesser grade. For stuff that is really not desirable, when we think about fruit in New Zealand, a lot of that is turned into juice. So if you think about your fresh up apple juice or your just juice, often got an apple base and then other kind of fruits added into it. So a lot of our imperfect fruit in New Zealand gets turned into juice. And that's great. So that's a really good use of it. Where we struggle a bit more with those imperfect fruit and vegetables is around the vegetable side of things. You can take carrots and turn it into carrot juice, so that's good, but you don't ever kind of see cabbage juice or, other vegetables. So it's a little bit trickier with the vegetables than it is with the fruit because there's less products that you can turn them into. So what tends to happen with stuff that's imperfect is often it just gets dug back into the ground. So it's a shame that it's not being used to feed people, but at least it's not necessarily going to landfill. It's just plowed back and the nutrients kind of go back into the soil. But once again, Countdown has done a really good job of this, and they sell a range of imperfect fruit and vegetables called the Odd Bunch. So you can go into their supermarkets and you'll see kind of like slightly dented or too big or too large things. So once again, they've tried to work with their suppliers to kind of go, right, yeah, it looks a bit odd, but it's still acceptable. We're just going to package it up and sell it at a slightly cheaper price. So it's great to see that, people are looking at, what can be done.
Okay, that's really great to hear. So people are starting to think of solutions around food waste, food rescue, which needs a lot more resourcing. So there's a lot of potential there, a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that whilst a lot has started and is happening, there's a huge lot to do. So I don't want to kind of give a rosy story and say everything's good. But equally, I think over the last 5 to 6 years, people have gone, it is a problem, we do need to be doing something, and there's that kind of heightened awareness. But we went around, we did a little survey of about 20 cafes where we went into all of our cafes and restaurants and we said, hey, we'll give you a free audit of your food waste, present your report, let you know how much you're wasting. And then if you would like us to come and help you work on this problem and minimise it, we're happy to do that for free. And no one took us up on that offer. So they were all happy to kind of get the research done. But when we said, look, do you want some help in reducing it? They were like, oh, no, we're all good. And I think that's the challenge for people, is that people are busy doing their normal everyday lives. And they're like, oh, I probably could do something about it, but I'm quite busy and I just don't have time. And so the challenge is, how do we make people realize that, saving food waste is good for the environment? It's going to help us with our climate change profile. It's probably going to save them some money, because, if you're a cafe or restaurant, the less food you waste, the more money you make. And, a lot of the food that we're throwing out can still taste perfectly good. So it's not like you're having to sacrifice on the flavour to stop wasting food.
Yeah. So, because at the beginning you said that food waste, this is an area that has lots of solutions and that we as individuals can have a huge impact on. So I'm really, really keen to share your work with everybody, because I think it's fantastic. Because you've got like the tips on your website, you've got lots of information on the carbon footprint from, I think there's a video that was fantastic. It just showed the impacts at each stage. And what other information did you have on there? So I'm blanking.
That's fine. So we've got lots of recipes. So if you kind of go, I've ended up with some leftover potato, I don't know what to do with it, you can kind of go, okay, mashed potato, what can I make out of it? And you might go, oh, potato gnocchi. That's a really easy way to kind of use that mashed potato. So we've got lots of recipes. We've got an A to Z storage guide. So if you're like, oh, what is the best way to store my avocado? Or what is the best way for this to last longer? You can look on there. The other thing is, if anyone's listening in as a teacher, we have lesson plans for schools. So if you are a teacher and you work with schools, we've got a series of 4 lesson plans, which are kind of quite fun. One of my favourite ones is how to eat an apple, so that you eat the whole of the apple, because often you see kind of taking 3 bites out of the apple and then it vanishes. So there's a really fun thing on kind of how to eat the whole of an apple and that can make. So some really good resources on there for people to use, and access to all of the research. And I think that's a really important thing to understand, is that when people say, well, how do you know we waste so much food? Well, we physically went into people's rubbish bins and we pulled out all that food and we weighed it and we costed it. And there's some photos there of, the food that we've actually found from people's rubbish bins. So it's not kind of a survey or an estimate. It's like, we physically went in and pulled the food out. And in one case, some of the food that we found hadn't passed its expiry date, was still in really good condition, was all wrapped up. So I took it home and ate it, because I'm like, it was like a bag of twisties that, was completely fine. Maybe someone was on a health kick and they were like, right, I'm going to get rid of all the junk food out of my house. So when we kind of talk about food waste, we know the challenges. We know that bread is the #1 most wasted food in New Zealand. That's the one thing. And yet we know that if you store your bread in the freezer, problem solved, Lots of really simple ideas for, using up those crusts and bread ends. If you've got children that are like, oh, mummy, I don't want to eat the crust, you can turn them into bread chips, and suddenly everyone's fighting to eat those crusts. So, and I think that's really important. It's important to be research-based. It's important to make sure that if we're saying that something's an issue, we've actually done the research so that we really understand the problem. And we're not trying to kind of scare people or overstate the problem. We've actually gone and looked and seen the food and then thought about, right, well, how can we get people to behave differently?
Yeah, I think I saw, I think it was on your Twitter feed, that the average Kiwi family throws away 3 shopping trolleys of edible food a year.
That right.
Really shocked me. I was like, oh, yeah.
$644 is the amount of food that is. So, $640 worth of food people buy intending to eat. They're not setting out to waste it, they're setting out to eat it, And you can kind of think, and I suppose this is one thing I'm really keen to talk about as well, is kind of the social norms around not wasting food, because people can feel like, oh, I'm a bit, you're frugal or you're a bit miser. And where this really happens a lot is in the traditional Kiwi potluck. So we're coming up to Christmas and everyone's like, oh, come round for a barbecue and it's potluck. And then at the end of the night, everyone kind of like, there's a little bit of food left, and often it just kind of gets thrown out because people are really embarrassed about. Whereas now with all my group of friends, we're like, hey, here's a container. Which of the yummy leftovers would you like to take home? And once you give people that kind of social license to do it, everyone's like, oh, yeah, well, I'd love to have those sausages for breakfast, or I'd love to take the salad home. But there's this real stigma around it. But I've seen that as you start having that conversation with people and saying, hey, look, we've got all this leftover food from the barbecue. Would you like to take some home?
Mm.
If you give people that opportunity, people are often really happy to take it home. In the organisation that I work for, every now and again we kind of have networking drinks where people come along and there's a speaker and we have nibbles. And at the end of the night, we used to throw all that food away. And now we have like little doggy bags available. And then, how when you have drinks, you've always got those hangers on at the end, who are determined to kind of stay right to the very end. So we say, look, here's a container. Why don't you take some food home with you? And as soon as you give people that social license to not waste food, people will be like, oh, great. And they'll take some food home for their family. Or if they're on a long drive back, and they haven't had dinner yet, they'll take some food to eat in the car. So I think we need to think about how do we change those social norms so that becomes the norm. The norm is, oh, we've got some food left over. Who would like to use it up? Who would like to take it home? We do a big annual conference for 500 people. And whenever we go to the conference now, we say, right, we want you to partner with a food rescue group locally. We want you to make sure that if our delegates don't eat all of the food, that it can be donated. And for many of our conference venues, it's the first time they've ever been asked to do that. But once they kind of do it and they see how easy it is, some of them have been able to kind of form permanent partnerships. And I think that's about, why should it be socially okay to waste food and to be considered kind of some frugal, weird person if you're not wasting food? It should be the other way around. People should be horrified that people don't want to use the food up, that don't want to redistribute out, what's left at the end of a night. So somewhere along the way, we've kind of, with our social norms of what's acceptable, we've kind of made it uncool to want to rescue food, to want to save food. And so I think we need to flip that back over and make it uncool to say, oh no, look, there's some really expensive brie here on this platter and we're just going to throw it out, instead of going, right, who would like to take the really expensive wedge of brie home and only one slice has been taken out during some kind of cocktail event.
That's fantastic. I never thought about conference organisers. Man, the food wastage must be huge. And so partnering is a really, really great idea. And I was thinking, before about the social norms. I mean, when I'm thinking about when I was a kid and, we had to eat everything on our plate, like everything, especially with grandparents because they grew up post-war where you ate everything, you respected food, you didn't waste it because it was scarce. And then somehow we've gone to the other extreme where we don't really think about our food anymore. We don't think about the impact of just throwing it out. Apart from, the methane that it releases, there's also a massive carbon footprint to get the food just to our door, to get the food to us, and then throwing it out seems, in this climate, a bit, not cool. So it's really, really cool to hear that there are lots of different ways and lots of different ideas that you guys are starting to implement, starting to work with other organizations to do. Right. Is there anything else that you thought you would like to cover today?
Look, I think we've kind of ranged over such a huge topic available. I suppose kind of my final comment is that, look, food waste is a really big issue, third largest contributor to climate change, but it is a solvable issue. So it's one of those ones where we know the answers, we know what we need to do. It's just, and what's hard about food is, and I often think about this because we do a lot of work in my job also around plastics and packaging. You can decide, right, well, I'm not going to use plastic, or I'm going to buy this in a better kind of material. And once you've made that decision, problem solved, you've changed the habit. The issue with food is that we buy food every day. So every day we have the opportunity to waste food or to use it all up. And that's a bit like dieting and exercise and things like that, when you have to be good all the time. It's not like you can have one day and you're like, oh, I didn't waste any food today, and then that justifies wasting food for the next 6 or 7 days in a row. So I think from an individual perspective, it's really kind of making that personal commitment and thinking, like, this is an issue, and where possible, I'm really going to try to do this. But you kind of have to do it all the time. You can't go, oh, well, it's Christmas, I'm going to take a break and waste a whole lot of food and then come back to it in the new year. And that's why it's so important that our food rescue groups get good ongoing funding, because if they can go, right, well, we're up and running for 2 years and then we don't have the finances to continue on a long-term basis, because supermarkets will always have more food then they can sell in a timely manner because we want to see the shelves full. So I think that's where, whilst the solutions are easy, we know what to do. It's just making sure that they're sustainable and that we don't just kind of do it for a month, but we try to embed it into our lifestyles in the long term.
So as individuals, there's a lot of things that we can start implementing in our own lives to make the changes. Like this is definitely something as consumers that we do have power over. And from a government level, there are things that they can look at introducing long term to help support food waste groups and like the French idea of supermarkets not wasting edible food, but like you said, that would take a 5 to 6 year lead in, I think.
Yeah.
Would you like to see it happen here?
Look, I think what we want to see is in every town in New Zealand, we want to see a way for the supermarket to easily be able to divert its food from landfill. Now, that in some instances that might be, is there a way that it can be turned into stock food? In some places, it's going to be fresh food rescue. In some places, it might be composting and turning it into commercial compost. And we know that at the moment, there are some locations in New Zealand that don't have access to any of those opportunities. So whether legislation is the way to drive that change, or whether there are other ways we can see that we can incentivize people to change, we can create those facilities. I think it's a bigger picture. I think in the short term, it's great that people like Angie Clark-Warren, who's one of the Labor MPs, she had what's called a select committee briefing around food waste. She got everyone involved in the area of food waste to kind of come, and a report's going to be coming out, we hope, in November with solutions as to what to happen. But I think the first thing that we really want to see at a government level is a target, which is, hey, so Australia's got a target to halve food waste by 2030. They've got a plan on what to do, and then they've got funding to make it happen. So that would be a really great thing to see here in New Zealand. Let's have a goal to make a difference on food waste. Let's put a target in there. Let's sit down and develop a plan. Let's put some money behind it. And then let's start looking through, what are the solutions internationally that would work really well here in New Zealand. Because if you don't have a goal to aim for and you don't have a plan on how to get there, you're not going to see that kind of structural change that we need when it's thinking about food waste in the supermarkets and food waste in the supply chain.
I'm going to keep an eye out for that report. I think it sounds really, really I think you need to go. But thank you so much for coming and talking about food waste. And I'm actually walking away from this feeling really hopeful, like really positive about this issue, because you've outlined lots of solutions. And not saying it's going to be easy, we can take control of this problem.
Right. Well, Alicia, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to everyone who's taken the time to listen in. I hope that's useful. You've seen our website. There's a contact email on there. So if anyone does want to get in touch with solutions or suggestions or feedback, we're happy to talk to anyone about food waste at any time.
Fantastic.